Welcome to Hearths of Myths. Today, the mist thickens on the lonely road, and the world falls into a dead silence. We are tracing the dark path of the Headless Horseman, the Dullahan. Close your eyes, settle in, and let the ride begin. To truly understand the entity known as the Dullahan, we must first divest ourselves of the modern world. We must strip away the comfort of the electric light bulb, the hum of the refrigerator, the constant reassuring glow of the smartphone screen. We must cast our minds back to a time when the night was not simply a lack of light, but a physical weight, a tangible, breathing presence that descended upon the emerald hills of Ireland like a heavy woolen shroud. In the rural parishes of County Sligo, in the rocky desolation of the Burren in County Clare, and along the storm-battered coasts of Cork, the darkness was absolute. It was a kingdom unto itself, governed by laws that had nothing to do with the rationality of the daylight hours. In this pre-industrial landscape, the Irish night was a sensory experience of profound isolation. The silence of the countryside was not empty. It was pregnant with intent. Every rustle of dry leaves in the hedgerow, every snap of a twig in the forestry, every distant cry of a vixen fox was scrutinized by the ears of those hurrying home. The good people, the Dáin Méithe, were believed to hold sway over these hours. But while many of the fae folk were communal beings, trooping fairies who danced in rings and held court under the hollow hills, there existed a different breed of spirit. These were the solitary fairies. They had no court, no queen, no society. They were singular, ancient, and intrinsically terrifying. And the king of this solitary dread, the monarch of the lonely road, was the Dullahan. The atmosphere surrounding the Dullahan is one of stagnation and dampness. Unlike the Banshee, whose arrival is heralded by a piercing, mournful cry that shatters the silence, the Dullahan brings with him a suppression of sound. Folklore accounts collected in the 19th century often speak of a dead silence that precedes his arrival. It is as if the natural world, the crickets, the owls, the wind itself, recognizes a predator against which there is no defense. The air grows heavy and metallic, tasting of ozone and ancient mold. The mist, that omnipresent feature of the Irish landscape, seems to thicken, swirling in unnatural patterns, coalescing into shapes that tease the eye. Imagine yourself walking down a boreen, one of those narrow, winding country lanes walled in by high banks of stone and briar. It is late November. The season of Samhain has passed, and the veil between the worlds is tattered and thin. The air is biting cold, the kind of damp chill that seeps through wool and settles in the marrow of your bones. You are miles from the nearest hearth fire. The only light comes from the faint, milky wash of the stars, obscured intermittently by drifting clouds. Then you hear it. It begins not as a visual terror, but as a rhythmic disturbance in the earth. It is a dull, wet thudding. It is the sound of hooves, but not the sharp, clattering strike of iron shoes on stone that a mortal horse would make. This sound is muffled, heavy, and sickeningly regular. It sounds like a mallet striking a coffin buried deep in the sodden earth. Thump, thump, thump. It vibrates through the soles of your boots before it registers in your ears. Accompanying this hoofbeat is a sound that W.B. Yeats described with chilling precision: the rumbling of wheels. But these are not the wheels of a farmer's cart returning from market. This is a grinding, subterranean roar, like millstones crushing grain, or the sound of heavy stones being dragged across the floor of a tomb. You stop. You press your back against the cold, wet stones of the wall, holding your breath, hoping that whatever is approaching will pass you by. The instinct is primal. Do not be seen. The sound grows louder, encompassing the entire horizon, filling your chest with a vibrating dread. And then he crests the hill. The silhouette is immense. That is the first thing that strikes the witness, the sheer scale of the figure. The horse is black, a void in the darkness, a creature that seems to absorb the faint starlight rather than reflect it. It is a charger of the infernal variety, massive in the chest and flank, moving with a speed that defies its size. But your eyes are drawn inevitably upward, to the rider. He sits rigid in the saddle, a posture of terrifying military discipline. He wears a long, flowing cloak of the deepest black, tattered at the edges, as if it has been snagged on the briars of the underworld for centuries. The cloak billows around him, giving him the appearance of a storm cloud tethered to the earth. Your gaze travels up the buttons of his coat, up the broad chest, up the high collar, expecting to meet a face. And there the horror strikes. Where the neck should end and the head should begin, there is nothing. A jagged, ruinous stump. A severance. The shock of this absence is visceral. The human mind is hardwired to seek faces. We look for eyes to gauge intent, a mouth to anticipate speech. To be confronted with the abrupt negation of the head is to be confronted with a violation of natural law. It is a biological blasphemy. The neck is not a smooth, healed scar. The folklore is specific on this. It is often described as raw, or covered in the pale, dead skin of a corpse, a gruesome pedestal for nothingness. But the Dullahan is not blind. He is not a fumbler in the dark. He does not need eyes in his shoulders to see you. For tucked securely under his left arm, or sometimes held aloft in his right hand, raised high like a lantern to illuminate the hedgerows, is his head. This is the image that has haunted the Irish imagination for over a millennium. The head is not a passive object. It is not a skull. It is a fleshy, rotting, living thing. The descriptions of the head are nauseatingly detailed in the oral traditions. The skin is said to be the color and texture of moldy cheese or stale dough, a pale, luminescent gray that glows with its own sickly phosphorescence. It is the texture of death that has been left in the damp too long. The eyes of the Dullahan are the true locus of fear. They are not empty sockets. They are small, black and darting, moving with a frantic, insectile intelligence. They scan the countryside continuously, swiveling in the rotting sockets, piercing through the darkest night and the thickest fog. Folklore claims that the Dullahan possesses supernatural sight. By holding his head aloft, he can see for miles across the dark plains of the Curragh or the bogs of Connemara. He can see through the walls of cottages. He can see the dying man in his bed, even if the shutters are drawn and the door is bolted. And then there is the mouth. The mouth is split in a rictus grin that stretches from ear to ear, a horrifying, frozen expression of mirthless joy. It is a grin that reveals teeth, sometimes described as blackened stumps, sometimes as sharp and feral. This head is not asleep. It is fully, terrifyingly awake. It mutters. It whispers. It is the navigator for the headless body, the eyes and ears of the reaper. The sensory experience of the Dullahan extends to the olfactory. Witnesses in the stories do not just see him, they smell him. As the black horse thunders past, a wind follows in its wake, but it is not a fresh breeze. It is a gust of stagnant air, carrying the unmistakable, cloying scent of the grave. It smells of wet sulfur, of rotting vegetation, of the corpse candle light, and of long opened crypts. It is the smell of mortality itself, forced into the nostrils of the living. The Dullahan is often seen carrying a weapon, though it is not a sword or a scythe. In his hand, he wields a whip. But consistent with his nature as a creature of biological horror, this whip is not made of leather. It is constructed from a human spine. The vertebrae are wired together, retaining their flexibility, allowing the whip to crack with a sound like a gunshot. He lashes his horse with the backbone of a defiled corpse, a profound symbol of his dominance over the structure of human life. Every crack of that whip is a reminder that we are merely bone and meat, waiting to be claimed. This entity, this shadow in the mist, is the Gan Ceann. He is the fetch of death. He does not stop for conversation. He does not accept pleas. He is a mechanism of the inevitable, as unyielding as the turning of the tides. When you see him, you do not run, for there is nowhere to run. You can only hide your eyes and pray that he does not stop at your gate. For if the rumbling wheels cease, and the wet thud of the hooves comes to a halt, it means only one thing. The head will speak, and it will speak only one word, a name. And if that name is yours, the mist will claim you before the dawn. To truly comprehend the Dullahan, to peel back the layers of folklore and reveal the skeletal truth beneath, we must become archaeologists of myth. We must dig beneath the 19th century ghost stories, beneath the medieval fairy tales, and reach down into the dark, bloody soil of Ireland's Iron Age. The Dullahan is not a spontaneous invention of a frightened peasantry. He is a legacy. He is the spectral after-image of a deposed and angry god. His lineage can be traced back to a deity whose very name was once whispered with trembling reverence, Crom Dubh. The name itself carries the weight of the earth. Crom Dubh translates to the dark, crooked one, or the black bent one. In other texts, he is known as Crom Cruach, the bloody, crooked one, or the maggot of the mound. These are not the names of a bright, sky-dwelling deity of light and reason. These are the names of a chthonic power, a god of the soil, the harvest, and the dark fertility that demands a price for survival. He was the terrible father of the grain, the lord of the seasons who ensured that the sun would return after the winter solstice, but only if he was fed. The center of his worship was a place called Mag Slecht in County Cavan. The name Mag Slecht is chillingly evocative. It translates to the plain of prostrations, or, more ominously, the plain of slaughter. The metrical Dinshenchas, the ancient lore of places, describes the idol of Crom Cruach that stood there. It was a pillar of stone, covered in gold and silver, a shimmering, terrifying monument to divine greed. Surrounding this central golden idol were 12 lesser idols made of stone, covered in bronze, standing like silent sentinels or a jury of the damned. It was here, the ancient texts tell us, that the High King Tigernmas and 3/4 of the men of Ireland gathered on the eve of Samhain, the festival we now know as Halloween. The atmosphere of Mag Slecht on that night would have been thick with the smoke of bonfires and the primal chanting of druids. The king and his people prostrated themselves before the golden idol. They beat their foreheads against the ground until the stones ran red with blood. The text says they died there. 3/4 of the population, worshipping Crom. Perhaps it was a plague, perhaps a mass hysteria, or perhaps it was a ritual slaughter on an unimaginable scale. But the darkest shadow over Mag Slecht is the legend of the firstborn. The Din Shenchas verses are explicit and horrifying. To him without glory, they would kill their piteous, wretched offspring, with much wailing and peril, to pour their blood around Crom Dubh. They offered the firstborn of every family and the firstborn of every flock to the idol. They sought to trade blood for milk, life for grain. The logic was brutal, but consistent. To sustain the community, the most precious thing, the future generation, had to be given to the earth. This is the crucial connective tissue between the god and the ghost. Crom Dubh was a head-taker. The ancient Celts operated within what scholars call a cult of the head. They believed the head was the seat of the soul, the container of a person's essence. Warriors like Dullahan were said to return from battle with the heads of their enemies tied to their chariots. To take a head was to take a person's power. Crom Dubh, as the supreme deity of this bloody system, was the ultimate consumer of heads. He demanded the heads of children to ensure the harvest. Then came the new faith. In the 5th century, St. Patrick arrived with his crozier and his gospel. The hagiographies tell us that Patrick marched to Mag Slecht and faced the dark god. He struck the golden idol with his staff, and it crumbled to dust, while the 12 bronze idols sank into the earth. The power of Crom was broken. The sacrifices ceased. The plain of slaughter fell silent. But gods do not die easily. They do not vanish into the ether just because a new church is built. They linger. They retreat into the shadows. They diminish. This is the birth of the Dullahan. Stripped of his divinity, stripped of his worshippers, and crucially, stripped of his golden idol, Crom Dubh devolved. He transformed from a macrocosmic god who controlled the fate of the entire nation into a microcosmic spirit who controls the fate of individuals. He became a solitary fairy, and in a stroke of profound poetic justice, the god who demanded heads was punished by losing his own. The etymology whispers this truth to us. The Dullahan is Gan Ceann, headless. Crom Dubh was the Ceann, the head of the mound. The removal of the head is the removal of his status, his crown, and his solar aspect. He is left as a wandering trunk, a headless torso riding through the night, forever seeking the tribute he was once freely given. The Dullahan's hunt is a spectral reenactment of the Samhain sacrifice. When he stops his horse and calls a name, he is selecting the offering. He is the echo of the priest pointing a finger at the victim on the plain of slaughter. Consider the Dullahan's aversion to gold. Folklore is replete with stories of the Dullahan fleeing if a gold coin or a gold pin is thrown at him. Why? In the context of the Crom Dubh myth, this makes perfect sense. Gold was the metal of his idol. It was the skin of his former glory. To be confronted with gold now, in his fallen, rotting state, is a painful reminder of what he once was. It is the solar metal, the symbol of the light he can no longer look upon. Or perhaps he rejects it because the time for golden tributes is over. He no longer wants the metal, he wants the blood. Even the time of year aligns perfectly. The Dullahan is most active at Samhain, the very night the sacrifices to Crom Dubh were performed. But his name also survives in the festival of Lugnasa in late summer. In many parts of Western Ireland, the last Sunday of July is called Domnach Crom Dubh, Crom Dubb's Sunday, or Garland Sunday. For centuries, even into the modern era, people would climb holy mountains on this day. It was a Christian pilgrimage, yes, but it was overlaid on the ancient practice of ascending the high places to honor the dark earth god. The people remembered his name, even if they forgot his face. The physical deformity of the Dullahan also mirrors the descriptions of Crom. Crom was crooked and bent. The Dullahan, carrying his head under his arm or in his pocket, presents a distorted, unnatural silhouette. He is hunched, terrifying, and fundamentally wrong. He is the Dark Man, Far Dorocha, a being of the soil and the grave, just as Crom was the god of the earth and the mound. So, when the Irish peasant of the 18th century looked out into the dark and feared the Cóiste Bodhar, the death coach, they were not fearing a random phantom. They were feeling the ancestral tremor of a trauma that was thousands of years old. The Dullahan is the cultural scar tissue left behind by the cult of the head. He is the memory of the stone knife. He is the manifestation of the terrifying bargain the ancients made with the land, that life feeds on death, and the harvest requires a reaper. The Dullahan is Crom Dubh, wandering the lanes of a country that has forgotten how to worship him, but cannot forget how to fear him. He is the king of the mound, unseated and beheaded, riding out to collect his tax. And unlike the gods of old who could be appeased with cattle or grain, the Dullahan accepts only one currency. He wants the soul. He wants the life. He wants to take you back to the plane of slaughter. As we delve deeper into the anatomy of this nightmare, we must confront the visual reality of the Dullahan with unflinching clarity. In the previous chapters, we established his presence as a shadow and his lineage as a god. But what does he actually look like when the mist clears and the moonlight catches him on the desolate road? The folklore of Ireland, particularly the accounts collected by Thomas Crofton Croker and later refined by Yeats and Lady Wilde, provides us with a biological description that is unique in the pantheon of world mythology. The Dullahan is not simply a man without a head. He is a tableau of active decay, a walking testament to the grave's refusal to keep its secrets. Let us begin with the silhouette. The Dullahan is almost invariably described as a figure of imposing, even gigantic stature. He is not the slender, ephemeral spirit of Victorian ghost stories. He has bulk. He has mass. He sits the saddle with the rigidity of a corpse that has succumbed to rigor mortis, yet he moves with a fluid, terrifying grace. His clothing is the garb of the archaic knight, a long, sweeping cloak of black, often described as tattered or moth-eaten, suggesting a garment that has been worn in the damp earth for centuries. Beneath this, he wears the dark, heavy coats typical of an 18th century gentleman or a highwayman, adorned with silver buttons that glint like cold, dead stars. But unlike a living rider, whose head would bob and weave with the rhythm of the horse, the Dullahan's collar stands empty. It is a high collar, stiff and dark, framing a void. The severance itself, the neck, is a detail often glossed over in modern adaptations, but the folklore is specific. It is not a clean surgical cut. It is a ruin. The stump is described as ragged, implying a violent tearing or a jagged hacking. In some accounts, the skin around the severance is pale and flaking, drawn tight over the exposed clavicles. It is a monument to violence, a permanent, visible injury that defies the healing properties of nature. But the true horror, the center of gravity for the entire myth, is the head itself. The Dullahan does not leave his head behind in the grave. He carries it with him, a constant, grotesque companion. The positioning of the head varies in the tales, but each variation carries its own specific dread. Most commonly, it is tucked firmly under his left arm, held against his ribs like a precious, horrific parcel. In other accounts, particularly when he is hunting or searching, he holds it aloft in his right hand. He raises it high above the empty stump of his neck, turning it into a lantern to illuminate the dark hedgerows and the winding lanes. This head is not a dry, bleached skull. If it were merely a skull, it would be a symbol, a memento mori. But the Dullahan's head is flesh. It is wet. It is rotting. The specific texture described in the oral traditions is nauseatingly vivid. Croker records that the head has the color and consistency of moldy cheese. Pause on that image for a moment. It suggests a texture that is soft, yielding, and deeply unclean. It is the color of stale dough, a pale, sickly gray-white that seems to absorb the dampness of the air. It is the flesh of a thing that has been dead for weeks, yet somehow retains a semblance of life. The features of the face are distorted, exaggerated by death and malice. The skin is drawn tight against the bone in some places and hangs loose in others, but it is the eyes that command the most fear. They are not the empty sockets of a skeleton. They are small, black, and fiercely intelligent. They are often described as darting or swiveling in their sockets with the frantic energy of flies. They possess a supernatural phosphorescence, a corpse light that allows them to pierce the deepest gloom. When the Dullahan raises his head, these eyes act as searchlights. They can see for miles across the dark, flat bogs. They can penetrate the walls of stone cottages to see the trembling families huddled inside. They are the eyes of a predator that does not need the sun. And then there is the mouth. The mouth of the Dullahan is frozen in a rictus grin, a term that describes the involuntary grimace of a corpse, but in this case, it is animated by a dark amusement. It is a grin that stretches from ear to ear, literally, splitting the face in a horrific crescent. The teeth are visible, sometimes described as blackened stumps, sometimes as a row of sharp, feral points. This mouth is not silent. It mutters. It gibbers. It speaks the names of the damned. The horror of the Dullahan is that the head is a separate entity from the body, yet they operate in perfect, terrifying unison. The hand raises the head. The eyes see the path. The knees guide the horse. It is a symphony of disjointed parts working together to facilitate death. There is also a tactile horror to the Dullahan. He is cold. The air around him drops in temperature, freezing the breath in your lungs, and he is wet. He belongs to the Irish landscape, a land of rain, bog, and mist. He drips. The cloak is heavy with water. The head glistens with a slimy sheen. He is the embodiment of the bad death, the death that happens out in the cold, in the dark, away from the warmth of the hearth. In some regional variations, the head has even more grotesque properties. In County Galway legends, the head is said to glow with its own internal light, glowing like a piece of rotting wood, foxfire, in a dark forest. This bioluminescence of decay serves as the Dullahan's lantern. Imagine seeing a faint, greenish-white light bobbing over the stone walls in the distance, only to realize as it draws closer that it is not a lantern, but a face. This visage of decay serves a specific mythological function. It is the antithesis of the beautiful fairies. The Tuatha De Danann were often described as radiantly beautiful, tall, and perfect. The Dullahan, as the remnant of the dark god Crom Dubh, represents the ugliness of the earth, the reality of what happens to the body when the soul departs. He is a walking reminder of our own mortality. He shows us what we will become, moldy, pale, and broken. When you visualize the Dullahan, do not see a man in a costume. See a physiological impossibility. See the tendons of the severed neck. Smell the ozone and the rot. Feel the gaze of those darting black eyes that are looking not at your face, but at your timeline, searching for the moment when your thread runs out. He is the visage of decay, and he is watching. If the Dullahan himself is a masterpiece of biological horror, the beast he rides and the weapon he wields are the instruments of his terrible trade. A rider is defined by his mount, and the Dullahan's horse is no ordinary animal. It is an extension of his own spectral nature, a creature of speed, power, and the infernal underworld. In the Irish language, the horse is often simply referred to as the Cóiste Bodhar, black horse, but the descriptions given in folklore elevate it to the status of a nightmare entity, a distinct character in the drama of the death ride. The horse is immense, matching the scale of its rider. It is universally described as black, not the glossy, healthy black of a prize stallion, but a matte, light-absorbing blackness like the bottom of a deep well or the scorched interior of a chimney. It is a funerary black. The animal's coat is often matted with mud and briars, suggesting it has galloped through the wild, untamed places of the other world to reach the mortal plane. What separates this steed from the puka, another shape-shifting spirit often appearing as a horse, is its singular purpose. The puka is a trickster, liable to take a drunkard on a wild ride and dump them in a ditch. The Dullahan's horse has no sense of humor. It is an engine of transport for the reaper. It moves with a terrifying velocity. Folklore accounts describe it tearing across the landscape, leaping over high stone walls and wide ditches with impossible ease. It does not run. It flows like a landslide of dark water. But the most striking feature of this infernal steed is the fire it generates. As its hooves strike the flinty roads of the Irish countryside, they do not merely click, they erupt. The friction between the supernatural hoof and the mortal earth creates sparks. But these are not the small, fleeting sparks of a normal horseshoe. The legends say the sparks are as large as cobblestones, or flash like lightning, illuminating the dark road for brief, terrifying strobe light intervals. This detail adds a kinetic, violent energy to the Dullahan's approach. He travels in a cloud of fire and darkness, a juxtaposition of heat and cold. In some of the darker oral traditions from County Sligo, the horse itself is headless, mirroring its master. However, the more common and perhaps more unsettling image is that of a horse with fiery red eyes, and nostrils that vent smoke and flame. The horse snorts the atmosphere of hell. It breathes the sulphurous fumes of the grave. Its tack and harness are not made of leather. Consistent with the Dullahan's motif of using human remains, the bridle is said to be crafted from human intestines or strips of tanned human skin, and the stirrups are old coffin handles. The beast is literally bridled with death. And then we must speak of the weapon. The Dullahan does not carry a sword. He is not a warrior who fights. He is an executioner who claims. He does not carry a scythe. That is the symbol of the continental Grim Reaper, an agricultural metaphor. The Dullahan's tool is far more visceral, far more personal, and infinitely more disturbing. He carries a whip, but this is not a whip of braided leather or horsehair. The folklore is explicit and unwavering on this point. The whip is made from a human spine. Let us dwell on the construction of this artifact. It is the vertebral column of a human being, likely stripped of flesh, bleached by the grave, and wired together to retain its flexibility. The handle of the whip is the sacrum or the pelvis, and the lash itself is the long articulated chain of vertebrae, tapering down to the smallest bones of the neck. The symbolism of this weapon is profound. The spine is the structural pillar of the human body. It is what allows us to stand upright, what houses the spinal cord, the conduit of our nervous system. For the Dullahan to use a spine as a whip is an ultimate act of domination. He has taken the very thing that supports human life and turned it into an instrument of terror. He literally beats his path forward with the backbone of a corpse. The sound of this whip is unique in the auditory landscape of Irish myth. It does not swish. It cracks with the violence of a gunshot. It is a dry, rattling clack-crack, the sound of bone striking bone, magnified by supernatural force. This sound is often the second warning of his approach, after the rumbling wheels. When the whip cracks, it is said that the very air seems to shatter. The Dullahan uses this spine whip not to strike his horse, for the beast knows its duty, but to clear his path and to punish the curious. We will explore the punishment of witnesses in a later chapter, but it is worth noting here that the whip is a tool of sensory deprivation. He uses it to lash out at the eyes of those who dare to watch him. The tip of the bony lash is precise. It is designed to blind. There is a deep psychological horror in this object. It suggests that the Dullahan is a scavenger of the grave. He repurposes the dead. The bridle of skin, the stirrups of coffin iron, the whip of bone. He is a figure composed of the debris of mortality. He utilizes the discarded parts of humanity to hunt humanity. The combination of the infernal steed and the spine whip creates an image of unstoppable momentum. The horse provides the speed, the unyielding forward motion that cannot be barred by gates or doors. The whip provides the authority, the cruel mastery over the environment. Together, they transform the Dullahan from a static ghost into a kinetic force of nature. He is a storm that rides. Imagine the scene, the thunder of hooves that shake the ground, the flash of massive sparks lighting up the hedgerows, the smell of sulfur and wet earth, and above it all, the sharp, sickening crack of a human spine snapping through the air. This is not a figure that can be reasoned with. This is the mechanism of the end, riding a beast of shadow, wielding the bones of the ancestors. If the sight of the solitary headless rider is enough to freeze the blood in the veins of a witness, there is a manifestation of this entity that heralds a doom even more profound. In the deeper, darker valleys of Irish folklore, the Dullahan does not always ride alone upon his charger. When the harvest of souls is heavy, or when the individual to be claimed is of significant lineage, the Dullahan arrives not on horseback, but at the reins of a nightmare vehicle. This is the Cóiste Bodhar, the deaf coach, or the silent carriage. The name itself, Cóiste Bodhar, pronounced Cóiste Bodhar, carries a linguistic dread. Bodhar implies deaf or deafening, suggesting a confusion of the senses. It refers to a silence so heavy, so absolute, that it feels like a physical pressure on the eardrums, a silence that drowns out the natural world. Or, in other interpretations, it refers to the sound the coach makes, a sound that is heard not by the ears, but by the soul, a rumbling that the deaf might feel in their bones. To visualize this carriage, we must abandon the image of a regal Victorian funeral hearse. The Cóiste Bodhar is a grotesque parody of human craftsmanship, built not by Wainwrights, but by the architects of the grave. The folklore collected by Lady Wilde and W.B. Yeats provides us with a blueprint of biological horror. Every component of the carriage is derived from the human form, repurposed with a cruel efficiency that mocks the sanctity of the body. The wheels are the most striking feature. They are immense, towering over a man's height, designed to crush the miles beneath them. But the spokes of these wheels are not made of wood or iron. They are crafted from human thigh bones, femurs, bleached white by the sun, or stained brown by the peat of the grave. They are set in rims of heavy iron, or sometimes rims made of curved ribs, creating a horrifying symmetry as they spin. When these wheels turn, they do not rattle, they grind. It is the sound of bone friction, a dry, rhythmic clacking that echoes the ticking of a clock counting down the final seconds of a life. The body of the coach is draped in black cloth, tattered and heavy, often described as the pall, the funeral cloth used to cover a coffin. But beneath these rags, the structure itself is said to be covered in dried human skin, stretched taut over a frame of bone, much like the ancient leather-covered boats, curraghs, of the Irish coast, but crafted from a far more sinister hide. The carriage is a mobile ossuary, a traveling tomb constructed from the very materials it seeks to collect. Lighting the way for this infernal vehicle are two candles. But again, the Dullahan uses no ordinary tallow or wax. The lanterns that swing from the front of the coach are human skulls. Inside these empty craniums, a ghostly fire burns. Folklore tells us that the candles are made from human fat, and the wicks are strands of human hair. These skull lanterns cast a sickly, greenish-yellow light, illuminating the road ahead with the bioluminescence of decay. They swing violently with the motion of the carriage, sending erratic shadows dancing across the hedgerows, shadows that look like grasping hands. The Cóiste Bodhar is drawn by 6 black horses. Unlike the solitary steed of the lone rider, these 6 are a team of darker intent. They are headless, just like their master, or they run with their heads lowered so deep that they appear headless in the gloom. They move in perfect, terrifying unison, driven by the Dullahan who sits high on the box, wielding his spine whip with the precision of a master coachman. The speed of the coach is impossible. Legends say it can overtake the wind. gates fly open at its approach. Stone walls crumble to allow it passage. There is no physical barrier in Ireland, not the great walls of the Norman castles, nor the iron gates of the landed gentry, that can impede the Cóiste Bodhar. It operates on a plane of reality, where physical obstacles are mere suggestions. If a gate is locked, it will burst open with a screech of metal. If a river bars the way, the coach will skim over the surface of the water, the bone wheels hissing as they touch the stream. But it is the auditory experience of the coach that is most haunting. Yeats writes of the rumbling of the Cóiste Bodhar. It is a sound that starts deep in the earth, a vibration that shakes the dust from the rafters of the cottages it passes. It is a relentless, grinding roar that fills the entire valley. Yet, and this is the paradox, it often goes unheard by those it is not meant for. A family might sit by the fire, oblivious, while the patriarch in the armchair grips the armrests, his face draining of color, because he alone hears the wheels stopping at the gate. Conversely, there are tales where the coach is terrifyingly silent. It glides. The bone wheels spin without a whisper. The hooves strike the ground without a thud. The only sign of its passing is the sudden extinguishing of lights in the houses it passes, or the sudden, unexplained chill that freezes the water in the bucket. This deaf coach is a thief of sound, creating a vacuum of silence in its wake. Why does the Dullahan choose the coach over the horse? In the narrative of the myth, the coach signifies a heavy death, perhaps a death that will affect the community deeply, or the death of a sinner whose soul is a heavy burden to bear. It is a vehicle of collection. While the lone rider might snatch a soul and gallop away, the Cóiste Bodhar implies a journey. It implies that the deceased is being taken somewhere specific, perhaps straight to the gates of the other world, or to the very foot of the Crom Dubh idol in the phantom realm. To see the Cóiste Bodhar is an omen of such finality that most who witness it do not survive the year. It is said that if the coach rumbles past your house without stopping, you have been spared, but only for now. You have been brushed by the hem of death's cloak. But if it slows, if the grinding of the thigh-bone wheels changes pitch and begins to decelerate, that is the moment when prayer becomes futile. The ride of the Dullahan is a terrifying spectacle of speed and fury, a headlong rush through the night that tears the mist apart. But the true climax of the myth, the moment of absolute crushing horror, is not the motion. It is the cessation of motion. It is the halt. Unlike other monsters of folklore that chase, hunt, or devour, the Dullahan is defined by where he stops. He is not a wandering predator looking for a random victim. He is a courier with a delivery address. The entire terrifying momentum of the ride, the sparks, the whip cracks, the rumbling wheels, is building toward a single, static geometric point. A specific doorstep, a specific gate, a specific window. When the Dullahan arrives at his destination, the change in atmosphere is instantaneous. The wind dies. The rumbling of the earth ceases. The sparks from the hooves vanish into the damp grass. The world falls into a dead silence, deeper than any before. The black horse, or the team of 6, stands statue still, their flanks heaving, emitting steam that curls like smoke in the moonlight. The figure of the Dullahan looms at the threshold, a dark tower of judgment. He does not dismount. He does not knock. He does not enter the house. The vampire must be invited. The wolf must blow the house down. The Dullahan has no need for such theatrics because his power is not physical entry. It is auditory summoning. He waits in the silence, perhaps for a heartbeat, perhaps for an eternity. And then he raises the head. He lifts it high or holds it out towards the house. The dead, rotting lips of the severed head part. The rictus grin widens, and the Dullahan speaks. He speaks only one word. It is a name. The power of the name in Celtic mythology cannot be overstated. To know a thing's true name is to hold power over it. When the Dullahan speaks the name of the person inside the house, it is not merely a call. It is a severance of the soul from the body. It is a metaphysical command that cannot be disobeyed. At the precise moment the name leaves the rotting lips of the head, the person within dies. There is no struggle. There is no blood. It might appear as a sudden stopping of the heart, a final exhale of breath in sleep, or a quiet collapse into the chair. The soul is drawn out, answering the call of its master. Some legends say the soul is sucked into the mouth of the Dullahan's head. Others say it simply climbs into the Cóiste Bodhar to take its seat for the long journey west. The terror of the halt lies in its inevitability. Folklore abounds with stories of desperate families trying to bar the Dullahan from their homes. They lock the great oak doors. They slide the heavy iron bolts. They shutter the windows and pile furniture against the entryways. But against the Gan Ceann, these efforts are like trying to hold back the tide with a sieve. The folklore is specific. Locks and bolts unlock themselves at his approach. The heavy wooden bars slide back by unseen hands. The gates of the manor house swing open on rusty hinges that should not move. The Dullahan does not need to break down the door. The door yields to him. He is death, and death has a master key to every room in the world. This feature of the myth emphasizes the futility of mortal resistance. You cannot fortify yourself against your own mortality. When the halt occurs, the walls of your home offer no more protection than a sheet of paper. There is, however, a secondary ritual associated with the halt, one reserved for the curious or the disrespectful. While the Dullahan comes for the dying, he has a violent intolerance for the living who dare to spy on him. If you are not the intended victim, but you make the mistake of opening your door to look or peeling back the curtain to peer into the dark, the Dullahan will punish you. One specific mechanism of this punishment is the basin of blood. Legend tells that if a person opens their door to watch the Dullahan stop at a neighbor's house, the headless one will lash out, not with the whip, but with a basin of fresh, warm blood. He throws it into the face of the observer. This is not just a physical assault. It is a marking. To be drenched in the blood thrown by the Dullahan is a curse. It signifies that you have been touched by the other world, tainted by the crimson essence of the sacrifice. Often, those marked by the blood sicken and die within the year, or they bear the stain of it that no water can wash away, a phantom redness that lingers on the skin. This aspect of the myth reinforces the taboo of the evil eye and the danger of seeing things meant for the other world. The halt is a sacred, terrible transaction between the god and the soul. It is not a spectator sport. To watch it is to profane it. The halt is brief. Once the name is spoken and the soul is claimed, the Dullahan does not linger. There is no mourning, no pause for reflection. The wheels begin to turn again. The whip cracks, The thunder resumes. He turns his steed back toward the dark, heading for the next name on his invisible list, or returning to the ancient burial mound from which he emerged. For those left behind in the silence of the aftermath, the halt is the defining trauma of their lives. They are left with the body of their loved one, now empty, and the fading sound of bone wheels grinding into the distance. They realize, with a cold clarity, that the locking of the door was never for the one leaving. It was for those remaining, a futile attempt to keep the cold reality of the Dullahan from freezing their own hearts. In the grand tapestry of Irish folklore, there are many rules that govern the interaction between the mortal world and the other world. Do not step into a fairy ring. Do not disturb a hawthorn tree. Do not eat the food offered by the good people. But concerning the Dullahan, the rule is far simpler and infinitely more severe. Do not look. The Dullahan is a solitary entity, but he is also a strictly private one. His grim task, the collection of the soul, the severing of the mortal cord, is a sacred transaction between the dark deity and the dying. It is not a spectacle for the amusement of neighbors. It is not a roadside curiosity. To witness the Dullahan is to intrude upon a moment of profound cosmic intimacy, and the Headless One tolerates no voyeurs. Human nature, however, is driven by a fatal curiosity. When the rumble of the Cóiste Bodhar shakes the dust from the thatched roof, or the wet thud of hooves stops outside the gate, the instinct to look is overwhelming. It is the same impulse that makes us slow down at the scene of an accident, the dark desire to see the face of death. But in the case of the Dullahan, this impulse is punished with a calculated and permanent violence. The primary instrument of this punishment is the spine whip we examined earlier. While the Dullahan uses this grotesque tool to urge his steed forward, its true purpose is precision striking. Folklore accounts from County Cork and County Galway are replete with stories of men and women who, hearing the noise on the road, could not resist the temptation. They would creep to the window. They would pull back the heavy wool curtain just an inch. They would press their eye to the cold glass, or worse, to the keyhole of the front door, thinking themselves safe behind the barrier of their home. But the Dullahan sees all. Remember the rotting head held aloft, the darting, phosphorescent eyes that can penetrate wood and stone. He knows he is being watched. The reaction is instantaneous. The rider does not need to dismount. He does not need to approach the window. With a flick of his wrist, he snaps the spine whip. The bone lash uncoils through the air with supernatural speed. It finds its target with impossible accuracy. It does not break the glass. It transcends it. Or, perhaps, in the terror of the moment, the witness doesn't realize the glass has shattered until it is too late. The lash strikes the eye, specifically, the eye that was looking. The folklore is visceral on this point. The punishment for seeing the Dullahan is the loss of sight. The whip flicks out the eye of the watcher, leaving them blind in that socket forever. It is a punishment that fits the crime with poetic cruelty. You wished to see that which is forbidden. Then you shall see nothing at all. There are chilling oral traditions of Old Pat or Mary of the Glen, local characters in village histories who wore an eye patch or bore a milky, scarred eye. When asked how they lost their sight, they would fall silent or whisper that they had looked out on a night when they should have kept their head under the blankets. This physical mark served as a warning to the entire community. The Dullahan leaves survivors, but he leaves them maimed, living testaments to his demand for privacy. There is another, perhaps even more disturbing variant of this punishment, reserved for those who are bold enough to open their doors. If a person flings open the door to confront the noise or to see who is passing, the Dullahan does not use the whip. Instead, he reaches into the dark recesses of his carriage or the folds of his cloak and produces a basin. This is the basin of blood. It is not metaphorical. It is a vessel filled with fresh, warm, metallic-smelling blood. The Dullahan throws the contents of this basin into the face of the observer. This act is an aggressive defilement. To be drenched in this blood is to be marked by the other world. It is a baptism of the grave. The folklore suggests that this blood is caustic. It stains the skin, it blinds the eyes, and often it acts as a curse. Those who receive the basin of blood often pine away and die within the year, consumed by a wasting sickness. It is as if the blood of the sacrifice, having touched them, now claims them. Why this extreme reaction to witnesses? We must return to the Dullahan's origins. If he is indeed the remnant of a god, then the act of watching him is an act of sacrilege. In ancient rituals, the uninitiated were often forbidden from viewing the holy mysteries. To look upon the god in his terrible aspect was to invite destruction. The Dullahan maintains this divine protocol. He is performing the harvest of souls, the old work of Crom Dubh, and it is work that belongs to the dark. There is also the element of the evil eye in reverse. In Celtic belief, the gaze is powerful. To be seen by the Dullahan is dangerous, but to see him is to establish a connection, a bridge between the observer and the entity. The Dullahan severs this bridge by destroying the eye of the beholder. He refuses to be an object of human perception. He is the subject. He is the actor. We are merely the harvest. The stories of the unwanted witness serve a vital function in the ecosystem of fear. They turn the home, usually a place of safety, into a trap. When the Dullahan rides, the safest place is not at the window, but deep under the covers, with eyes squeezed shut and hands over ears. The horror lies in the passivity required for survival. You must hear the monster. You must smell the rot. You must feel the vibration of the wheels. But you must not, under any circumstances, acknowledge him with your sight. To look is to lose. In the suffocating dread that surrounds the myth of the Dullahan, where locks open of their own accord and gates crumble before the bone wheels, there exists a single, shimmering glimmer of hope. It is a weakness, a specific aversion that provides the only known defense against the Headless One. It is not a prayer, for the Dullahan predates the saints. It is not iron, which burns the skin of the common fairy. It is the metal of kings and idols, gold. The folklore is remarkably consistent on this point. While the Dullahan cannot be stopped by stone walls, oak doors, or running water, he is terrified of gold. Even a distinct small amount, a single gold coin, a gold ring, or even a gold-plated pin, is enough to drive him back. Imagine the scene. A farmer is walking home late from the fair in Galway. He has stayed too long at the pub, and the moon has set. The road is dark, and suddenly he hears the wet thud of hooves behind him. He feels the cold wind of the grave on his neck. He knows, with a primal certainty, that the Dullahan is upon him. He breaks into a run, but no mortal can outrun the infernal steed. The snorting breath of the black horse is hot on his back. The spine whip is raised to strike. In a panic, the farmer fumbles in his pocket. His fingers brush against copper pennies, against a silver shilling. Useless, all of it. But then, his fingers close around a gold sovereign, perhaps the profit from a lucky sale that day. He pulls it out and hurls it over his shoulder into the darkness. The reaction is immediate and violent. The Dullahan shrieks, a sound not from a throat, but from the severed neck and the rotting head simultaneously. The thunder of hooves stops. The presence recoils, dissolving into sparks and shadow. The farmer is left alone, panting in the silence, his life bought for the price of a single coin. Why gold? To understand this, we must look again to the mythology of Crom Dubh. As we established, Crom was the dark, crooked one, but his idol at Mag Slecht was covered in gold. He was a god of the earth, but he demanded the solar metal as tribute. Gold represents the sun. It represents the light, the harvest, the sovereignty of kings. When Crom was cast down, he lost his gold. He lost his solar aspect. He became a creature purely of the dark earth. In this fallen state, gold becomes anathema to him. There are several interpretations for this deep-seated fear. First, it may be that gold represents the power he lost. To see it is a painful, blinding reminder of his former glory, a psychological torture that drives him away. It is the symbol of the light that defeated him. Second, it may be that gold acts as a solar ward. In many mythologies, creatures of the underworld cannot abide the sun. Gold, being the earthly manifestation of the sun's imperishable light, burns the Dullahan. It is a piece of captured daylight that the creature of night cannot touch. Third, and perhaps most disturbingly, it may be a rejection of the wrong offering. Crom Dubh used to receive gold and blood. Now, as the Dullahan, he is obsessed only with the blood, the life force. When a mortal throws gold at him, it is an insult. It is an attempt to buy him off with the old currency when he has come for the new. He flees not out of fear, but out of a confused, chaotic rejection of the transaction. However, the defense of gold has limitations. It does not kill the Dullahan. It does not banish him forever. It merely repels him for the moment. It buys time. The Dullahan is an immortal force. A gold coin is a temporary shield. Furthermore, in the poverty-stricken rural Ireland of the 18th and 19th centuries, gold was incredibly rare. A gold sovereign was a fortune. A gold ring was a family heirloom. Most peasants had never held a piece of gold in their lives. This economic reality adds a layer of tragic horror to the myth. The one thing that could save you was the one thing you likely did not possess. The folklore tells us of men frantically searching their pockets, finding only copper and silver, and realizing they are doomed. It transforms the Dullahan into a predator of the poor, a monster that cannot be bribed by those who have nothing. There are specific variants of the defense story. In some, a gold pin dropped on the road is enough to stop the Cóiste Bodhar in its tracks, the massive bone wheels unable to roll over the tiny speck of solar metal. In others, wearing a gold wedding ring renders a person invisible to the Dullahan's sight, the gold acting as a form of spiritual camouflage. But we must remember the atmosphere of the encounter. The throwing of the gold is a desperate, frantic act. It is not a calculated, magical ritual. it is a bribe offered to a hangman. And even if it works, even if the rider turns away in a cloud of sulphurous smoke, the witness is left with a lingering dread. They have lost their gold, yes, but they have kept their life. Yet they know, with a chilling certainty, that the Dullahan is still out there. He has not been destroyed. He is merely hunting elsewhere. And gold, once spent, is gone. The next time the hooves thunder on the road, the pockets may be empty. The golden ward is a fragile defense. It highlights the desperate bargaining of humanity in the face of death. We throw our precious metals at the dark, hoping it will be enough to keep the reaper at bay for one more night. But the Dullahan knows, as the old god Crom knew, that in the end, all gold returns to the earth, and so do we. Ireland is not a monolith. It is a quilt of counties, each with its own dialect, its own landscape, and its own distinct flavor of darkness. While the core archetype of the Dullahan, the headless rider, remains consistent across the island, the manifestation of this terror shifts like the mist as one travels from the rocky coasts of Cork to the desolate bogs of Galway, and up to the shadowed glens of Sligo. These regional variants are not merely contradictions. They are facets of a complex gem, revealing how the landscape itself shapes the nightmare. In the south, particularly in County Cork, the Dullahan is often associated with specific geographic landmarks, ruined abbeys, ancient mills, and crossroads. It is here that we find one of the most vivid and terrifying accounts recorded by Thomas Crofton Croker in the early 19th century, the legend of Hanlon's Mill. This story serves as a perfect case study of the Cork variant, where the Dullahan is not just a passive observer, but an aggressive pursuer. The tale concerns a man named Michael Noonan, a figure typical of folklore, brave, perhaps a bit reckless, and traveling late at night when he should have been safe in bed. The setting is critical. A lonely road leading past an old, disused mill. In Irish folklore, mills are liminal spaces, places of transformation, grain to flour, often inhabited by spirits. As Noonan drove his cart home, the familiar sounds of the night were swallowed by that characteristic dead silence. Then came the rumble. In the Cork tradition, the Cóiste Bodhar is described with industrial horror. It is not just a carriage, it is a juggernaut. Noonan watched in paralyzed terror as the coach thundered past him. He described the horses as headless, their black coats gleaming with sweat that smelled of sulphur. But it was the driver, the Dullahan, that froze his heart. In this specific regional account, the Dullahan was not content to simply pass by. When Noonan, overcome by that fatal curiosity we discussed earlier, dared to follow the coach to see where it was going, the entity reacted. The coach stopped. The Dullahan turned. And in a moment of terrifying aggression, he did not just speak a name. He marked his witness. This leads to the specific Cork detail of the splattered blood. Noonan was blinded not by a whip, but by the basin of blood thrown with unerring accuracy. The local legend says that Noonan survived, but he was a changed man, bearing the psychological and perhaps physical stains of the encounter for the rest of his days. The Cork Dullahan, therefore, is a creature of territory. He guards his route, traveling north to County Galway and the wild regions of Connemara. The myth takes on a different texture, shaped by the harsh, unforgiving landscape of bog and stone. Here, The Dullahan is intrinsically linked to the straying sod, Fod Mervail, and the treacherous nature of the boglands. The Galway Dullahan is often seen as a silent herder. He appears to travelers who have lost their way in the mist. In these Western tales, the head of the Dullahan is described with bioluminescent properties. It glows with the faint, sickly light of decaying wood, foxfire, or the will-o'-the-wisp. He holds it high, not just to see, but to lure. In the vast flatness of the Galway bogs, a light in the distance promised safety, a cottage window, a hearth. But the traveler who follows the Dullahan's light is not led to shelter. They are led into the deep, sucking mire of the bog. Here, the Dullahan is less an executioner and more a psychopomp who leads the soul into the earth itself. The horror here is environmental. The Dullahan is the spirit of the land that wants to swallow you whole. In County Sligo, the land of Yeats and Ben Bulben, the Dullahan myths are more aristocratic. Here, the Cóiste Bodhar is often associated with the big houses, the estates of the Anglo-Irish gentry. The death coach is seen driving up the long avenues of oak and lime trees that lead to the manor houses. In these legends, the Dullahan is a servant of dynastic fate. He does not come for the common peasant, as often as he comes for the lord or the lady of the house. The Sligo tradition emphasizes the sound of the coach. It is said that the rumble of the Dullahan's wheels can be heard by everyone in the district, except the person for whom it comes. This inversion of the auditory warning adds a layer of tragic irony. The community hears the doom approaching. The victim sits in blissful ignorance until the door opens. There are also accounts in Sligo of the Dullahan opening the gates of the estate, gates that have been rusted shut for 100 years, with a mere gesture of his flesh whip. Another regional quirk is found in parts of County Kildare, where the Dullahan is sometimes conflated with the Far Dorocha, the dark man, to the point where they are indistinguishable. Here, the Dullahan is a black-clad rider who offers a ride to weary travelers. If the traveler accepts and mounts the horse behind the rider, they find themselves trapped. The horse gallops not to the next town, but to the nearest graveyard, where the rider dissolves into the earth, attempting to drag the passenger down with him. This variant serves as a cautionary tale against accepting help from strangers, a survival rule in a bandit-plagued countryside. There is also the headless nature itself, which varies. In some rare and particularly grotesque traditions, from Shire County, Tyrone, the Dullahan does not carry his head under his arm. Instead, the head floats in the air a few feet in front of the rider, tethered by an invisible cord of spiritual energy. This floating visage bobs and weaves, scouting the path, a disembodied drone of flesh that allows the rider to keep his hands free for the whip and the reins. What binds these regional echoes together? It is the shared understanding of the night. Whether he is the aggressive pursuer of Cork, the silent bog lighter of Galway, or the aristocratic reaper of Sligo, the Dullahan serves the same function. He is the anthropomorphism of the Bad Death. In the rocky terrain of the Burren in County Clare, where the landscape is nothing but limestone pavement and ancient tombs, the Dullahan is said to make no sound at all. The Cóiste Bodhar in Clare is the silent coach in the truest sense. It is a visual trauma only. The horror lies in seeing the massive, violent motion of the galloping horses and the spinning bone wheels, all unfolding in total vacuum-like silence. It creates a cognitive dissonance, a break in reality that drives witnesses mad. These variants prove that the Dullahan is not a static character from a storybook. He is a dynamic folklore complex, adapting to the fears and the geography of the people who tell his stories. He is as fluid as the rain that lashes the Atlantic coast, and as hard as the granite of the Wicklow Mountains. To know the Dullahan, you must know where. You are standing in Ireland, for the ground beneath your feet dictates the form of the monster that rides toward you. In the gloomy pantheon of Irish death spirits, the Dullahan does not stand entirely alone. While he is a solitary fairy, shunned by the trooping Shidhi and the mischievous Puka, there is one other entity with whom he shares a dark and intimate kinship. She is the Queen of the Mound, the Weaver of Sorrow, the Banshee, known to the world as the Banshee. To understand the Dullahan fully, we must view him in contrast to, and occasionally in concert with, this female spirit. They are the two sides of the same funerary coin, the feminine and the masculine, the auditory and the visual, the mourner and the executioner. They are the kindred of the grave. The Banshee, Banshee, meaning woman of the fairy mound, is primarily a herald. Her role is to warn. She attaches herself to the great families of Ireland, the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, and her presence signifies that death is imminent. But crucially, the Banshee does not cause death. She mourns it. Her weapon is the coined, keening, a piercing, mournful cry that shatters the night. It is a sound of pure, distilled grief, crying for the loss that is about to happen. She is a passive figure, often depicted combing her hair or washing the blood-stained shrouds of those about to die, the Beanie variant. The Dullahan, by contrast, is the active agent. He is not a mourner, he is a harvester. He does not cry for the dead, he collects them. Where the Banshee's presence is sorrowful, the Dullahan's presence is terrifying. He does not warn the family out of loyalty. He stops at the door to execute a sentence. If the Banshee is the sound of the family's grief, the Dullahan is the sound of the coffin lid slamming shut. There is a profound gender dynamic at play here. The Banshee represents the traditional role of women in Irish funerary rites, the keeners, the washers of the body, the vessels of emotional expression. The Dullahan represents the masculine aspect of death, the violence, the intrusion, the physical removal of the body, the driving of the hearse. He is the aggressive force of mortality. But the relationship between these two entities goes deeper than mere contrast. Folklore, particularly in the Midlands of Ireland, suggests a terrifying collaboration. There are rare but potent accounts where the Banshee and the Dullahan appear together. In these nightmare scenarios, the Banshee is not seen sitting by the river or weeping on the windowsill. She is seen riding inside the Cóiste Bodhar. Imagine the scene. The Dullahan drives the coach, his headless form dominating the box, his spine whip cracking to clear the road. And peering from the window of the coach, illuminated by the sick light of the skull lanterns, is the pale, weeping face of the Banshee. She looks out at the doomed house, her keen mingling with the rumble of the bone wheels. This image is the ultimate convergence of Irish horror. It suggests that for certain deaths, perhaps those of great tragedy or great evil, the entire machinery of the otherworld is mobilized. The Dullahan drives the vehicle that will carry the soul away, while the Banshee provides the soundtrack of doom. They are colleagues in the industry of death. There is also a functional overlap. Both are solitary fairies. Both are tied to the ancient burial mounds, Sheedy. Both are repelled by certain human interferences. Holy water for the Banshee, gold for the Dullahan. But their interaction with humanity is different. You can sometimes bargain with other spirits. You can sometimes pity the Banshee. But you can never bargain with, and certainly never pity, the Dullahan. Some folklorists suggest a chronological relationship. The Banshee appears first. Her cry is heard 2 or 3 nights before the death, a warning to the family to prepare the priest and gather the relatives. She prepares the emotional space for death. The Dullahan appears at the moment of death itself. He is the finality. He arrives when the Banshee falls silent. When the keening stops, the wheels begin. This distinction is vital for the atmospheric understanding of the myth. The Banshee is the dread of anticipation. She is the fear of what is coming. The Dullahan is the terror of the arrival. He is the thing itself. Comparing their physical forms reveals further polarity. The Banshee is often described as having long, flowing white hair and wearing a gray or white cloak, colors of mist and shroud. She is a spirit of the air and water. The Dullahan is black. Black horse, black cloak, black night. He is a spirit of the earth and the fire, sparks. White and black. Water and earth. Grief and doom. In the psyche of the Irish people, these 2 figures partitioned the night. If you heard a wail in the wind, you prayed for your kin. If you heard a rumble in the earth, you prayed for yourself. There is a tragic loneliness to both. The Banshee is condemned to eternal mourning, crying for deaths that are not her own. The Dullahan is condemned to eternal wandering, a king without a head, a god without a shrine, seeking a harvest that will never fill his emptiness. They are the king and queen of a kingdom of shadows, bound together by the silence of the grave. In some interpretations of the Crom Dubh myth, it is suggested that the Banshee might be a manifestation of the earth goddess, the consort of the dark god. When Crom was cast down and became the Dullahan, his consort became the mourner, weeping for his fall and the endless cycle of death he now presides over. Whether husband and wife, or merely fellow workers in the dark, the Dullahan and the Banshee stand together as the twin pillars of Celtic mortality. In the solitary, wind-swept landscape of the Irish supernatural, the Dullahan is often viewed as an anomaly, a singular, roving nightmare without kin or court. He belongs to the solitary fairies, those entities who reject the communal dances of the good people to pursue their own dark, inscrutable agendas. However, deep within the oral traditions of the Midlands and the West, whispered by the Seanachai, storytellers, over fading peat fires, there exists a connection that chills the soul even more than the sight of the Headless One alone. The Dullahan is not entirely without a counterpart. In the grim economy of death, he has a partner. She is the voice to his silence, the white shroud to his black cloak, the mourner to his executioner. She is the Banshee, the Banshee. To understand the full, suffocating weight of the Dullahan myth, we must understand his relationship with this female spirit. They are the twin pillars of the Celtic bad death. While modern pop culture has reduced the Banshee to a mere screaming ghost and the Dullahan to a Halloween monster, in the authentic folklore, they represent a profound duality. They are the masculine and feminine aspects of mortality, bound together by the grave. The Banshee, Banshee, literally woman of the fairy mound, is the herald. Her function is grounded in the ancient Irish custom of keening, Cóiste, the ritualistic wailing performed by women over the body of the deceased. But the Banshee keens before the death occurs. She is a creature of anticipation. She washes the shrouds of those about to die at the ford of the river. She combs her long, pale hair while weeping tears of blood. She screams into the night wind to warn the ancient families, the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, that the thread is about to be cut. The Dullahan, by contrast, is the harvester. He is the active principle of death. He does not warn, he arrives. He does not weep, he strikes. While the Banshee represents the emotional devastation of loss, the grief that shatters the family, the Dullahan represents the physical brutality of the end, the stopping of the heart, the severing of the soul. Imagine the sensory experience of a night where both are active. The folklore suggests a terrifying chronology. First, there is the sound of the Banshee. It is a high, thin wail, rising and falling like the wind through a cracked window pane, a sound of pure, distilled sorrow that prickles the skin of anyone with the blood of the old families in their veins. This is the dread of waiting. It is the knowledge that death is coming, but the uncertainty of when. Then the keening stops. The silence that follows is not a relief. It is a vacuum. It is the dead silence we have spoken of in previous chapters. And into that silence comes the low tectonic rumble of the Cóiste Bodhar. The Banshee has finished her work. She has announced the decree. Now, the Dullahan rides to execute it. But there are darker tales still, accounts that suggest these two are not merely colleagues, but companions. In the rarest and most disturbing legends found in County Westmeath and parts of Galway, the Banshee and the Dullahan appear together. In these nightmare scenarios, the witness sees the black coach thundering down the lane, the headless driver lashing the headless horses with his spine whip. But the coach is not empty. Seated inside the Cóiste Bodhar, looking out from the velvet-curtained windows, is the Banshee. She is not screaming now. She is silent, her pale face illuminated by the green light of the skull lanterns, her eyes red from weeping. She is being chauffeured by the Dullahan to the house of the doomed. Or, perhaps, she is collecting the soul that he has just claimed, cradling it like a child, as the carriage turns back toward the other world. This image, the weeping woman and the headless man sharing a carriage, is the ultimate convergence of Irish horror. It suggests a domesticity to death that is profoundly unsettling. Are they husband and wife? Some scholars of mythology suggest that Crom Dubh, the dark earth god who became the Dullahan, may have had a consort. Was the Banshee once an earth goddess, now reduced to mourning the harvest that her fallen husband must reap? The symmetry is striking. He is the earth, dark, heavy, silent. She is the air, pale, flighty, vocal. There is also a functional intersection in their methods. Both are repelled by specific wards, but the wards differ, reflecting their elemental natures. The Banshee, being a spirit often associated with water, washing the shrouds, is sometimes said to fear holy water or iron. The Dullahan, a spirit of the deep earth and the ancient sacrifice, fears gold. They cover each other's weaknesses. To bar the door against the Banshee is one thing. To bar it against the Dullahan is impossible. Furthermore, we must consider the distinct regional variations of this partnership. In some stories, the Banshee acts as a scout for the Dullahan. Her cry marks the house, acting as a beacon for the blind, darting eyes of the Dullahan's severed head. She pinpoints the location of the dying soul, and he follows the trail of her sorrow to claim it. This makes the Banshee's cry not just a warning to the family, but a signal to the reaper. It transforms her grief into a targeting mechanism. The contrast in their physical forms further enhances the horror. The Banshee is almost always described as having long, flowing hair, a symbol of life and vitality, though in her case, it is often gray or white with age and grief. The Dullahan has no head at all. The Banshee is often seen washing clothes, a domestic, nurturing act twisted into a funerary rite. The Dullahan is seen driving horses or wielding a whip, aggressive, masculine, dominant acts twisted into violence. In the psychological landscape of the Irish peasantry, the connection between these two entities served to explain the different stages of dying. The Banshee was the fear of the diagnosis. The Dullahan was the finality of the event. To hear the Banshee was to know you were losing someone. To hear the Dullahan was to know they were gone. Ultimately, the Banshee and the Dullahan are kindred of the grave, because they both represent the intrusion of the other world into the sanctity of the home. The Banshee sits on the windowsill. The Dullahan stops at the gate. They breach the perimeter. They remind the living that the walls we build to keep out the cold are nothing to the spirits who own the night. They are the king and queen of the lonely death, riding together through the mist, bound by a duty that predates the gods of light. While the Dullahan is a distinctly Irish nightmare, rooted in the specific soil and blood of the Emerald Isle, the motif of the headless being, the acephalos, is a recurring trauma in the human collective unconscious. To fully appreciate the Dullahan, we must place him within this broader context, not to dilute his uniqueness, but to sharpen it. By comparing him to his mythological cousins, we can see exactly why the Irish variant is so singularly terrifying. He is not a soldier. He is not a ghost. He is something far worse. The most famous parallel, and the one that must be addressed to clear the air, is the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Washington Irving's creation has colonized the modern imagination, turning the headless rider into a Hessian mercenary who lost his head to a cannonball. But we must be clear. Irving's horseman is a ghost. He is the spirit of a dead man, a soldier, bound to a specific battlefield, seeking his lost body part. He is tragic, perhaps, but he is ultimately a human spirit. The Dullahan is not a ghost. He is a fairy. He is a sheehy. This distinction is crucial. In Celtic mythology, fairies are not Tinkerbells. They are fallen angels, or deposed gods, or spirits of the earth that predate humanity. The Dullahan was never a man. He never lived a mortal life, never loved, never died in battle. He is an elemental force. This makes him infinitely more alien and dangerous than the Hessian. The Hessian wants his head back. The Dullahan carries his head as a tool. The Hessian chases Ichabod Crane. The Dullahan comes for a specific soul ordained by fate. The difference is between a restless spirit and a divine executioner. We find deeper, more resonant parallels in the Celtic cult of the head. The ancient Celts were obsessed with the head. They believed the soul resided in the head, not the heart. Diodorus Siculus and Strabo wrote of Celtic warriors hanging the heads of enemies from their horses' necks. In the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a text heavily influenced by Celtic motifs, we see the Green Knight survive beheading, picking up his own head, which then speaks to the court. This is a direct literary ancestor of the Dullahan. The Green Knight, like the Dullahan, is a creature of nature, green-black, testing mortals, surviving the impossible. He represents the regenerative, terrifying power of the other world, which cannot be killed by mortal weapons. Another fascinating connection lies with the Sluagh, the host. In Scottish and Irish folklore, the Sluagh are a flock of unforgiven, restless spirits who fly through the sky like birds, hunting for souls. While they are a trooping horror, the Dullahan is the solitary version of this archetype. Some folklore suggests the Dullahan might be the leader of the Sluagh, the general of the unforgiven dead. When the Cóiste Bodhar rides, it is sometimes said that the wind around it is filled with the whispering voices of the Sluagh, eager to snatch the soul before it can reach heaven. We must also look to the wild hunt of Germanic and Norse mythology. Odin, or Woden, leads a furious host across the sky, accompanied by baying hounds. The Dullahan is, in many ways, the Irish manifestation of the wild hunt, but condensed into a single figure. Instead of a noisy army, we have a silent, solitary rider, or a silent coach. This reflects the Irish landscape, lonely, intimate, quiet, versus the vast, storm-swept forests of the Germanic tradition. The Dullahan's whip of human spine is a localized, grotesque version of Odin's spear, a weapon of divine authority turned into an instrument of terror. There is also a shadowy connection to the Cluricon. In some very specific southern Irish tales, the Cluricon, a type of leprechaun who guards wine cellars, is sometimes conflated with headless spirits when he is drunk or angry. However, the Cluricon is a trickster. The Dullahan has no sense of humor. The conflation likely comes from the solitary fairy classification, but the Dullahan sits at the darkest end of that spectrum. Then, there is the Crom Dubh connection we established earlier. This links the Dullahan to the archetype of the deposed god, like the Titan Cronus in Greek mythology, who devoured his children and was cast down to Tartarus. Crom Dubh was the devourer of the firstborn, who was cast down to become a bogeyman. The Dullahan is a god in exile. This gives him a gravitas that other headless ghosts lack. He carries the weight of millennia. His head is not just a body part. It is an idol. Furthermore, the body horror of the Dullahan, the moldy texture, the smell of cheese, the use of spinal cords, connects him to the revenant myths of Eastern Europe, the Vrikolakas, or early vampire myths. These are physical, rotting beings that return from the grave to harm the living. But unlike the vampire who seeks blood to sustain himself, the Dullahan seeks the soul to fulfill a duty. He is a bureaucrat of death, not a predator of hunger. The most unique aspect of the Dullahan in comparative mythology is his weaponization of the body. No other major headless figure uses a human spine as a whip. No other figure drives a carriage made of thigh bones and skin. This specific iconography points to a culture deeply familiar with death, exhumation, and the physical reality of the corpse. It reflects a time when the bones of the ancestors were not hidden away, but were part of the landscape, in cairns, dolmens, and passage tombs that dotted the countryside. The Dullahan uses the ancestors as weapons. In summary, when we compare the Dullahan to the rest of the world's headless hosts, he stands apart. He is not a cautionary tale about losing one's head in battle. He is not a prankster. He is the Gan Ceann, the ancient, chthonic harvest god reduced to a shadow, riding a steed of night, armed with the bones of the dead, coming to collect the tax that humanity owes to the earth. He is the terrifying reminder that the head, the seat of our ego, our identity, our self, is easily detached, and that in the end, we are all just harvest for the rider. How does a god die? In most mythologies, gods die in battle, consumed by wolves or struck down by lightning. But in Ireland, gods do not die. They recede. They step backwards into the mist. They sink into the hollow hills. They change their names. The survival of the Dullahan through 15 centuries of rigorous Christianity is one of the most remarkable feats of cultural endurance in human history. He is a pagan stain that no amount of holy water could wash away, a shadow that the light of the Church could not banish. To understand the legacy of the Dullahan, we must look at the mechanism of his survival. Syncretism. When St. Patrick and the early missionaries arrived in the 5th century, they found a land saturated in the worship of Crom Dubh. They realized quickly that they could not simply tear the belief out by the root without killing the patient. Instead, they grafted the new faith onto the old. We see this most clearly in the calendar. The ancient festival of Lugnasa, the harvest celebration often associated with Crom's demand for tribute, was not banned. It was baptized. It became Garland Sunday, or Domhnach Crom Dubh, Crom Dubb's Sunday. Consider the sheer tenacity of that name. For over 1,000 years, devout Catholics in County Mayo, County Kerry, and County Galway have climbed holy mountains like Croagh Patrick or Mount Brandon on the last Sunday of July. They climb to pray to the Christian God, yes, but the date and the act of ascending the high place is a direct muscle memory reenactment of the pilgrimage to the dark idol. The Church transformed the blood sacrifice into a floral one. Instead of offering the heads of the firstborn, the people were encouraged to bury flowers or garlands of greenery on the hilltops. But the Dullahan, the spectral remnant of Crom, remained as the darker memory of what used to happen. He became the boogeyman that priests used to enforce morality. Stay on the righteous path, they might say. Or the Gan Ceann will find you on the dark road. The Church utilized the fear of the old god to drive the flock toward the new one. But there was a time in Irish history when the Dullahan was not just a story, but a felt reality. We must speak of An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger of the 1840s. During the famine, Ireland became a necropolis. Death was no longer an occasional visitor. He was a permanent resident. The countryside was littered with the unburied dead. The dead silence that folklore attributes to the Dullahan became the actual silence of depopulated villages. The coffin ships that took emigrants away were real-life death coaches. In this era of unimaginable trauma, the myth of the Dullahan took on a terrifying new weight. When the carts rolled through the villages to collect the bodies of those who had died of starvation or typhus, the rumble of their wheels was indistinguishable from the Cóiste Bodhar. The reality of death had caught up with the mythology. The Dullahan was no longer a phantom of the past. He was the spirit of the famine. He was the visual language the people used to process a genocide of nature. The hungry grass, Fear Gorta, and the straying sod became potent symbols of a land that was literally eating its children. It is likely that many of the most vivid accounts of the Dullahan recorded by Croker, Wilde, and Yeats, collected in the decades immediately following the famine, were fueled by this collective trauma. The image of the gaunt rider or the rotting head resonated deeply with the people who had watched their loved ones waste away and decompose before their eyes. The Dullahan became the avatar of the bad death that had swept the island. As we moved into the 20th century, the Dullahan faced a new threat: modernity. The electrification of rural Ireland in the 1940s and 50s pushed the shadows back. The electric light killed the mystery of the boreen. The tractor replaced the horse. The car replaced the carriage. The dead silence was filled with the hum of power lines and the noise of traffic. And yet he persisted. He survived by migrating from belief to entertainment, and then back to archetype. In America, the Irish immigrants took the Dullahan with them. He merged with Germanic legends in the Hudson Valley to become Washington Irving's Hessian. But in Ireland, he remained distinct. He became a staple of the Céanachai's repertoire. He became a figure of cultural pride, a monster that was uniquely, terrifyingly Irish. However, we must be careful not to Disneyfy him. In recent years, there has been a tendency to make the Dullahan a cool, action figure character in fantasy novels and video games, a guy with a pumpkin head and a flaming sword. This is a betrayal of the source material. The true legacy of the Dullahan is not excitement. It is dread. It is the smell of moldy cheese, not pumpkin spice. It is the spine whip, not the magic sword. The legacy of the Dullahan is the persistence of the irrational in a rational world. Even today, in the modern Ireland of tech companies and motorways, there are places where the GPS fails. There are ruins where the locals do not go at night. There are old roads in County Sligo where, if you ask an old farmer about the Far Dorocha, he will not laugh. He will look at the sky. He will make the sign of the cross. The Dullahan reminds us that the land has a memory. He is the guardian of the ancient transaction, that life is a loan, and the debt must be paid. He is the shadow that stands behind the shoulder of modern Ireland, whispering that no matter how bright the lights of Dublin shine, the dark is older, and the dark is patient. He survived the coming of Patrick. He survived the Vikings. He survived the Normans. He survived the famine. He has survived the internet. As long as humans fear the sudden, lonely death, the Dullahan will have a road to ride on. We have traveled a long, dark road together. We have stood in the mist of the Iron Age and watched the kings of Ireland bow their heads to the golden idol of Crom Dubh. We have smelled the ozone and sulfur of the infernal steed. We have heard the wet thud of hooves and the terrifying bone-dry crack of the spine whip. We have looked, dare we say it, into the darting, phosphorescent eyes of the severed head, and we have seen the basin of blood waiting for the curious. The Dullahan is more than a monster. He is a masterpiece of the macabre imagination. He is the perfect articulation of the fear of the inevitable. In a world of chaos, he represents a terrifying order. He does not kill at random. He has a name. He has a destination. He is the courier who cannot be bribed, the judge who cannot be swayed, the executioner who cannot be stopped. Why do we need him? Why do we, sitting in the comfort of our warm homes, return to this story of a rotting, headless rider? Because he validates our fear of the dark. We live in a world that tries to sanitize death. We hide it in hospitals. We cover it with flowers. We speak of it in hushed, polite euphemisms. The Dullahan strips all of that away. He is death in its rawest, most primal form. He is distinct, loud, smelly, and terrifying. He allows us to confront the king of terrors in a form that, while horrifying, is understandable. He follows rules. He hates gold. He stays on the road. In giving death a shape, even a headless shape, we gain a strange kind of power over it. We can name it. As the fire in our hearth burns down to embers, and the shadows in the corners of the room begin to stretch and merge, take a moment to listen. Outside your window, the world is moving. The wind is rattling the branches of the trees. A car passes in the distance, its engine rumbling like a low growl. It is just the wind. It is just a car. But the folklore of Ireland asks you to consider the possibility that it is something else. Somewhere, on a lonely boreen in County Cork, or on a windswept bog road in Galway, the mist is thickening. The crickets have gone silent. The air has grown cold and heavy. And out of that silence comes a sound that has echoed for 2,000 years. The grinding of wheels made of thigh bones, the striking of sparks from the flinty earth. He is still riding, the old god, the fallen king, the solitary fairy. He is clutching his head to his chest, his black eyes scanning the horizon, looking for the next house, the next gate, the next soul. Do not look for him. If you hear the rumble, do not go to the window. Do not pull back the curtain. Turn your face to the wall. Cover your ears. Hold your loved ones close. And if you have a piece of gold, a ring, a coin, a chain, keep it close to your hand. For the night is long, and the roads are dark, and the Dullahan has miles to go before he sleeps. Thank you for journeying with me into the shadows of Celtic mythology. If you felt the chill of the Irish mist, or heard the crack of the whip in your mind, please leave a like and subscribe to the hearth. It helps us keep the fire burning against the dark. Share your own stories of the good people or the solitary spirits in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and whatever you do, don't open the door. We have analyzed the anatomy, the history, and the symbolism of the Dullahan. We have traced his lineage from the blood-soaked altars of the Iron Age to the famine-struck villages of the 19th century. But in the tradition of the Seanachai, the Irish storytellers who held the history of the land in their minds like a living library, analysis is never enough. To truly know a spirit, you must walk in the footsteps of those who met him. You must breathe the same air they breathed on the nights when the wheels began to rumble. The folklore of Ireland is not a dry collection of facts. It is a tapestry of narratives. And among the hundreds of fragments collected by antiquarians like Thomas Crofton Croker and Lady Wilde, there are specific encounters that stand out. These are the lost legends, the specific, detailed accounts of men and women who looked into the abyss and lived, though often scarred, to tell the tale. In this chapter, we will step away from the academic and immerse ourselves in the narrative. We will reconstruct two of the most famous Dullahan encounters with full atmospheric detail, allowing you to experience the dread as if you were standing on the boreen yourself. The Tale of Hanlon's Mill. Our first narrative takes us to the rolling, rocky hills of County Cork in the early years of the 19th century. The protagonist is a man named Michael Noonan, a figure well known in local lore as a man who feared neither ghost nor devil, at least until this particular Tuesday night. Michael had been at the shoemaker's house, mending his brogues and sharing gossip by the fire. The night was typical for November. The wind was howling down the chimney, and the rain was lashing against the small window panes like handfuls of gravel. When the time came to leave, the neighbors warned him. "Stay the night, Mick," they urged. "The moon is dead, and the good people are abroad." But Michael, stubborn and perhaps emboldened by a little poitín, laughed them off. He pulled his heavy wool coat tight around his neck, jammed his hat low over his ears, and stepped out into the dark. The road home took him past an ominous landmark known as Hanlon's Mill. In Irish folklore, old mills are thin places. They are places of grinding and crushing, often abandoned, and reclaiming by the spirits of the land. As Michael approached the mill, the rain suddenly stopped. The wind died. The terrible, dead silence descended upon the valley. The only sound was the squelch of his own boots in the mud. Then he heard it. The rumble. It started as a vibration in the soles of his feet, a deep, grinding tremor that felt like the earth itself was shivering. Then came the sound of the wheels. Clack, 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 clack. The sound of dried bones striking stone. Michael dove into the ditch, pressing himself into the wet briars and nettles, praying to be invisible. From his hiding place, he watched the Cóiste Bodhar pass. It was a terrifying machine of death, drawn by headless horses whose coats were matted with the clay of the graveyard. But it was the driver that froze Michael's heart. The Dullahan sat high on the box, his headless torso silhouetted against the clouds. In his raised hand, he held his own head, the eyes glowing with that sickly green phosphorescence, scanning the hedgerows like a lighthouse beam. The coach thundered it past, but Michael, driven by that fatal, uniquely Irish curiosity, did not stay hidden. He wanted to know where the death coach was going. He wanted to know who in the parish was to die that night. So he crawled out of the ditch and began to follow the tracks of the coach. He followed it for a mile, watching the sparks fly from the hooves. The coach eventually slowed and turned into a gateway. Michael crept closer, peering through the bushes. He saw the Dullahan stop. He saw the headless figure wait. And then he saw the headless one turn. The glowing eyes of the severed head swiveled in their sockets. They locked onto Michael's hiding place. The Dullahan did not speak. He did not chase. Instead, he reached into the dark recesses of the carriage and pulled out a basin. With a motion of terrifying grace, he hurled the contents at Michael. It was not water. It was blood. Michael felt the warm, metallic liquid splash across his face and chest. He screamed and turned to run, fleeing blindly through the dark, tearing his clothes on the thorns, falling into ditches, until he collapsed at his own door. The next morning, Michael Noonan was found by his family, shivering and delirious. But the horror was not just in his mind. His coat, his shirt, and his skin were stained with a dark, crimson residue that no water could wash away. For the rest of his life, Michael Noonan bore the mark. He eventually lost the sight in his left eye, the eye that had peered through the bush. The Dullahan had exacted his price. curiosity had been paid for in sight and blood. The Golden Pin of Galway. Our second narrative travels west, to the desolate, stone-walled fields of Galway. This story illustrates the fragility of the defense against the Dullahan and the desperate, quick thinking required to survive. The hero of this tale is a young blacksmith named Padraig. Blacksmiths in Irish mythology are often considered to have special powers, as they work with iron and fire, the elements that repel fairies. One night, Padraig was returning from a distant forge, riding his own mare. The night was clear but moonless, the stars providing only a faint milky illumination. As he rode across the Curragh, he heard the echo of other hooves behind him. He looked back, expecting to see a neighbor. Instead, he saw the black outline of the Dullahan, gaining on him with impossible speed. The headless rider was not in a coach this time. He was mounted on the black charger, the spine whip cracking in the air like a pistol shot. Padraig urged his mare to a gallop, but the mortal horse was no match for the infernal steed. He could smell the sulphur. He could hear the gibbering of the rotting head tucked under the Dullahan's arm. The headless one was close enough that Padraig could hear the swish of the black cloak. He knew that if the Dullahan overtook him, the name would be spoken, and he would fall dead from the saddle. Padraig reached for his pocket, searching for iron, a nail, a horseshoe, anything to throw. But iron has no power over the Dullahan. Then he remembered the folklore. Gold. He searched his pockets frantically. He was a poor man. He had no sovereigns, no guineas. He felt only the rough fabric of his trousers. The Dullahan was now alongside him, the spine whip raised to strike his eyes. The glowing head was turning toward him, the mouth opening to speak his name. In a moment of desperation, Padraig remembered the gift he had bought for his sweetheart, a cheap brooch, essentially brass, but fastened with a tiny, genuine gold pin. It was smaller than a fingernail, a speck of solar metal. With trembling fingers, he tore the brooch from his tunic. He struggled to separate the pin, the Dullahan's shadow falling over him like a shroud. Just as the rotting lips formed the first syllable of his name, Padraig threw the pin. He didn't aim for the rider. He threw it on the ground, directly in the path of the black horse. The effect was cataclysmic. As the hoof of the infernal steed touched the earth where the tiny speck of gold lay, the beast reared violently. It shrieked, a sound like metal tearing. The Dullahan lost his balance, fighting to control the animal. The presence of the gold, no matter how small, acted as a spiritual barrier, a piece of the sun that the creature of the dark could not cross. Padraig did not look back. He galloped until his mare foamed at the mouth, crashing through his own gate and barring the door. When he went back the next day, in the safety of the sunlight, he found the road scorched where the Dullahan's horse had reared. The earth burned black, and there, shining in the charred dirt, was the tiny gold pin. He picked it up, cold and heavy, and kept it for the rest of his life, not as a decoration, but as the most powerful weapon in his possession. These stories, retold here in the firelight of our imagination, serve to ground the myth. They remind us that the Dullahan was not just a concept. He was an event. He was a creature that interacted with the lives of the people, leaving behind physical traces, scorched earth, stained coats, blinded eyes. He was the terror of the Tuesday night, the nightmare of the November eve, a story written in blood and gold on the landscape of Ireland. We have now reached the end of our journey through the mist. We have dissected the Dullahan from every angle: historical, physical, mythological, and narrative. We have looked at him through the lens of the Iron Age druid, the medieval monk, the 19th century peasant, and the modern folklorist. But as we prepare to leave the hearth and step back into our own reality, we must ask one final question. Why does this specific image, the headless rider, hold such eternal power over us? The answer lies in the concept of identity. As humans, we identify ourselves and each other by the face. The face is the canvas of emotion, the port of communication, the seat of the self. To remove the head is to remove the humanity. A ghost with a face can be reasoned with. It might be your grandmother, your father, a tragic figure seeking peace. But a ghost without a head is a cipher. It is a machine. It cannot smile. It cannot weep. In the traditional sense, it cannot be recognized. The Dullahan is the ultimate other. He is the negation of the self. By carrying his head under his arm, he creates a horrific disconnect. The thinking part is separated from the acting part. The eyes watch, but the body strikes. This fragmentation mirrors the ultimate disintegration of death itself, the separation of the body from the soul, the flesh from the spirit. Furthermore, the Dullahan represents the unstoppable. In a world where we like to believe we have control, where we have medicine, technology, security systems, the Dullahan is a reminder of the one thing we cannot control. He opens locked doors. He crosses rivers. He overtakes the fastest horse. He is the embodiment of the deadline, a word that takes on a literal meaning here. This series has aimed to be more than just a recounting of facts. It has been an attempt to reconstruct an atmosphere. The Irish landscape is a crucial character in this story. The dampness, the darkness, the isolation. The Dullahan cannot exist in a brightly lit city. He needs the boreen, the hedgerow, the silence. He is a creature of the environment as much as he is a creature of the spirit world. As you go forward, remember the lessons of the Gan Ceann. Respect the silence of the night. Do not let your curiosity lead you into places where you do not belong, and perhaps keep a little piece of gold in your pocket, just in case. The myth of the Dullahan is not about scaring you for the sake of a cheap thrill. It is about respect. Respect for the past, respect for the dead, and respect for the powers that were here long before us and will be here long after we are gone. The fire is dying now. The embers are glowing with that same faint, dying light that we see in the Dullahan's eyes. The wind is picking up outside. The story is told. The cycle is complete. Thank you for listening to Hearths of Myths. If this deep dive into the dark heart of Celtic folklore resonated with you, if you felt the chill of the Banshee's cry or the rumble of the death coach, please consider subscribing to the channel. Like the video to help us share these ancient stories with others, and ring the bell so you are warned when the next legend rides out of the mist. Sleep well, travel safely, and may the road rise up to meet you, and may it be empty of dark riders.